Linda is, on one hand, the CEO of a Kenyan SME support center in Nairobi. The center provides high-quality business development services, capacity building, and capital raising support to meet the needs of startups and small, growing businesses in Kenya. On the other hand, Linda is an associate partner at Capital Africa Advisors. They offer corporate advisory, capital raising, and market entry services in Kenya and wider East Africa, but covering as well like Botswana, Congo, Angola, Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, Tanzania, and Zimbabwe. There, she leads the sourcing and execution of equity and debt transactions. Linda came all the way from Nairobi to confirm that Africa, Sub-Sahara, is open for business. Please.
Good morning. So it's a pleasure to be here, all the way from Nairobi, Kenya. So I'm basically here to make a pitch about Africa and why it's open for business. I truly believe Africa is it. It's where the growth is, and it's where we all need to put our money. So it's a pleasure to be here. I guess the question on every business leader, politicians, and policymakers is, has Africa run out of steam? Yes, no, maybe. In the 2000s, everyone was saying Africa is rising. Africa is the next growth frontier. When people started going in, they realized, oops, there's so much surmountable challenges, risks in this continent. So in between 2010 and 2015, these questions started to come. Has it run out of steam? For the investors here, do you still want to invest in Africa? So this, between 2010 and 2015, we noticed a decline in GDP growth in Africa, 3% compared to 5% earlier. And the thing is, Africa is not a country. Africa has 54 countries that are distinct, unique, with various challenges. So the GDP decline was mostly caused by, one, obviously North Africa and oil and the political turmoil in two distinct groups of North African countries, so Egypt, Libya, Tunisia. Then those are the slow growers causing some decline. Then you have the oil companies, people dependent on natural resources, so Nigeria, Zambia, minerals and oil, decline in oil prices and etc. Then you have the growing economies, the stable growers, so Botswana, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Ethiopia, Morocco, showing some improvement in terms of GDP growth. So if you look at Africa collectively, you might be mistaken because there are various diverse countries, very distinct, with offering various opportunities. So the underlying drivers of growth, however, in Africa are not lost. The same growth drivers that were there in the 2000s are still there. The growth drivers are, one, Africa, the urbanization rate in Africa is still one of the highest in the world. Someone talked about it. So by 2020, you foresee 168 million people will live in cities. Someone talked about it. So that presents a lot of opportunities. In terms of size, that's like 10 sizes of Cairo. Cairo is the largest size, is the largest in terms of meters squared in Africa. So that's 10 sizes of Cairo needed to fit the population that will be there in 2020. So also we have a workforce that is larger and vibrant and young compared to any part of the world. 60% of the world's population, you find that the fertility rate is actually lower than the replacement rate. But in Africa, the fertility rate and the number of people and the young, vibrant population is there. So you have a huge workforce that is there for you to take advantage of. More and more of the younger workforce are going to school. We have education that has improved. Then we have the technological changes and the technological support that we have. We have, I mean, in Africa, the technology is really, really rising. In terms of mobile money, smartphone penetration, smartphone, 60%. It is forecasted that in 2020, 60% of African populations will have smartphones, compared to 18% currently, 60%. What does this mean? It means e-commerce, mobile payments. East Africa alone is a leader in terms of mobile payments. In Nairobi, I basically don't do anything using cash these days. Have you heard of M-Pesa? Yes, no? M-Pesa, so mobile money for us. I pay my bills on phone. I get money from my bank account on phone. I literally don't have to go to the bank. I literally don't have to do anything, like have cash. I pay for everything, taxi, buy goods, services, even milk at the kiosk. Kiosk is like a small retail shop in Kenya. We buy everything via the phone. So that speaks to the technological opportunities that are there in Africa, right from the phones and mobile money. E-commerce. Nigeria doubled its revenue in e-commerce. There's so much opportunity. Almost everything is going e-commerce. So even e-commerce platforms, even meat, even food right now is e-commerce. Even your local fundi. Fundi is like a craftsman. Everything is on e-commerce. You want a plumber, you go to your phone and order on e-commerce in Kenya, in Nairobi. So we see a lot of these growth drivers that are still persistent, that are still there in Africa. For all of you investors to come, there's obviously continued abundance of resources. So the minerals, agricultural cropland, people are still producing. There's 60% of arable land. I mean, people are not yet utilized the entire production that could potentially be there in Kenya, in Africa, and in Africa. The key opportunities. So I've summed them up into 3, which are the key opportunities that I foresee. So the first one, as has always been, is the consumer and business spending. Now, our consumer markets, this is now an opportunity for all of you to bring your goods, but necessarily we want to promote a lot more local manufacturing. It's projected that it will be 2.1 trillion, the consumer market size in Africa, growing at a rate of 3.8% per annum. Half of this growth will come from East Africa, Egypt, and Nigeria. So for all of you looking for investment opportunity in terms of the consumer market, you can see where this will be. The key drivers, of course, will be 60% is the expanding population. We looked at the population growth, especially in urban cities. Since it's consumer goods, urban dwellers will require to spend a lot more on their household goods, any kind of household goods that you have in the house. We have, obviously, there's a slightly increase in income that is fueling the consumer demand, and really for basic necessities, because a lot of us are still not on luxury, but a lot of the basic necessities. And obviously, the urbanization. Urbanization will definitely drive the consumer market. Will definitely drive the consumer market. The second opportunity is really the B2B, supplying of goods and materials, capital goods and materials. This has largely been overlooked. People have been talking about the consumer market in Africa and in Kenya, but there really is an opportunity on the B2B. Nigeria and South Africa obviously have gone ahead. It accounts for 40% spending in 2016. This is according to World Bank, IFC, and McKinsey. And it's expected that there'll be a 50%, that growth is expected to grow to 2.6 trillion in 2025. And a lot of that obviously will be in materials, 50%, and then 16% on capital goods. So if you're in the capital goods space, you can already see which area and which opportunities you can explore and in which countries. Third, which is the one I'm most passionate about, manufacturing. I mean, literally everything, when we talk about value addition, there's very little in Africa. A lot of it is raw materials. We export our raw material, we export our goods in the raw form. In Kenya, we export tea in the raw form. We export coffee in the raw form. We export literally everything in the raw form. So there's really an opportunity to do value addition. This has been estimated to grow. Right now, the output is about $500 billion in Africa. We're looking at that number doubling to $1 trillion in Africa, so that we can be at par to countries that are really industrializing, like India, at 7.4% per annum. Now, which categories of products do we see this happening? We have, obviously, agro-processing. Agro-processing is where I see a lot of the opportunity. It's really, really untapped. There's vast land. Like in Kenya, literally, very few of the agricultural products are value added. So you have pulp, even pulp that we use in yogurt is actually imported. And yet we have vast arable land that could be exported. Things like any value added dried fruits. There's literally, on all the agricultural value chains, there's literally a lot of opportunities to value add. That hasn't been done. So it calls for a lot more African countries to step up. It calls for a lot more African leaders to step up. And obviously look for foreign direct investment to really build these African companies. So I represent SMEs as well. And on the SME space, that's where I see the growth is. I mean, many investors will look for the big deals, $10 million and up. How many African countries can actually absorb $10 million? How many African companies can actually absorb $10 million, countable? So the growth is really around $2 million to $10 million for a lot of the small growing businesses looking for growth capital to move to the next level and then hopefully export, meet the local demand, export to Africa, and then export to the rest of the world. How do you plug in? How do you plug in? Obviously, they can be exploited. Sub-Saharan markets can be exploited as consumer markets, regional production platforms, innovation and product development hubs, source of talent, which has really happened a lot. Someone talked about the brain drain and the source of raw materials. Entry into Sub-Saharan Africa can obviously be through greenfield acquisitions, where you go and set up your own field from scratch. Is that recommended? I don't know, maybe not. Acquisitions, joint ventures, alliances, or any form of collaboration with local players. Collaboration is key. Someone talked about being successful in Sub-Saharan markets. Obviously, the collaboration and having a local partner is key and is everything. So the strategic choices that would face you, number one, either you replicate or adapt. This is a challenge I see with a lot of the people coming to invest into Africa. You want to replicate what you did in your home country to Africa. Africa is unique. Kenya, the countries are very unique. You might as well just try and adapt to the challenges and the risks that are there. So for example, people like Heineken, when Heineken came into Africa, it realized one main challenge in terms of it had to also, on top of setting up the plant, it had to set up the water treatment plants, and etc. You have to adapt to the challenges. You have to perhaps invest more dollars and address the challenges that are there. The challenges should not deter you from coming to Africa. You should actually look at them as opportunities to actually and work around it as an opportunity, whether it calls for an additional investment or not. In terms of, you can either compete alone or collaborate. I strongly advise against competing alone. Collaboration is key. Finding a strategic partner would be very key. And then you could either accept or attempt to change the market context. In some instances, someone talked about working with the political class is very key. I mean, given that a lot of the things are driven by politics, you have to be able to accept that it's political and that you can't do away with politics. So you're all very welcome to Africa. You have to do your research in terms of which country you could potentially go for, and depending on which line of business that you're in. And yes, those are my contacts. In case you're looking to come into East Africa, you're very much welcome, and I'll be happy to guide you through the process. And yes, Africa is rising, has always been. Thank you.